Hello, good afternoon. My name is Randy Wilt. I'm a PhD in communications. I've been working in helping people to prepare their first speeches and to present their first speeches for several years. I very much enjoy it. I enjoy working with students in all academic levels and also in dealing with business professionals, business leaders, just people in general, because speaking is by far one of the scariest things you can do in talking about public speaking. People don't like to public speak, and it goes to show. Quite often they're either not prepared for it or they have stage fright, all these different things. And part of being a good public speaker is being able to understand your audience and how to prepare an effective speech. So today we're going to talk, and we're going to go fairly quickly through all this. We're going to talk about first different types of speeches. You have the informative speech, the persuasive speech, and a catch-all for all the other ones that we may call the special occasion speech. So informative speech is where you are taking some information. Maybe you're explaining the theory of relativity. Maybe you're explaining how a black hole is formed, and you're going to impart the information over to your audience. Then you may have a persuasive speech. Maybe you're trying to persuade someone about the importance of recycling, or maybe the importance of neutering your pet. And then, of course, special occasions is a grouping about everything else. It could be a funeral eulogy. It could be a toast at a wedding. It could be an introductory speech. It could be an acceptance speech. Even have had it said that it could be a press conference where you're actually reading from a script. All of those things are basically going to fall into the item of being a special occasion. To be an effective speaker, you have to know your audience. That is just a mandate almost. And you have to be able to connect with your audience. And there's several ways, and we'll be talking about some of those. But your audience will either make or break your speech. And you can do all the preparation in the world. You can have the best content. You have the best notes. You have the best visual aids. But if your audience doesn't connect with you and you do not connect with your audience, it all just goes awry. People just don't even listen to you. So how do you connect with your audience? I like some research that I've heard about in the past talking about how pupils will show a level of connection. So the question is, does a dilated pupil mean that you've connected with your audience? If you are looking at an audience member, and I tell all my students and people I train in speaking, is that look for 2 or 3 people in the first few rows, and of course more as you go further back, that you can actually look at when you're talking, that you can connect with them. You see a friendly face, you see someone whose eyes are lit up because they're connected with you. When you look at those people, how do you know if a person actually has that connection? And one of the things that they seem to think is through the dilation of the pupil. Now, here's a picture of a dog. And it says pupils are the canine's language. And many of you probably have dogs. You can't really pull this off with a cat. But have you ever gotten right into the middle of your dog's face, just gotten real close up to it? And I do this sometimes with my dog, and I just grab him by the head, and I've got a what we call a Chowski, which is a Chow Husky mix, and he's a very energetic dog. And I get right in his face, and when I do that, his eyes, his pupils will dilate. And that's because of 2 reasons. One of the obvious reasons is because I'm so close to him. And when you get close to things, your pupil will dilate. Second thing is that it's a sign of affection. And when people see a dilated pupil, that is a connection with each other. And I'll tell you someone who figured this thing out a long time ago, and I just admire them for doing this, and this was Disney. Disney figured out that when the characters had eyes with a dilated pupil, the people in the audience connected to them. And this film here, Beauty and the Beast, is a great example. You have the Beast here, then you have Belle. Now, first of all, notice Belle has brown eyes. Let's take a look a little closer at her eyes. And this is when Belle is singing one of her songs. And look at her pupils, how big her black pupils are. Of course, she's got brown eyes too. One of the things they found out is that when you have an image like this, your audience they're starting to connect with you. Also, the little girls want to be like Belle. They want to go out and, I guess, buy all the merchandise. Now, and I'm not telling you this because I want you to get up there and have dilated pupils because people connect with you. I'm telling you this because when someone has dilated pupils, that means they're understanding, they're connecting with you. They're in there with you. Compared to, here's Gaston. Now, Gaston is, look at his eyes. Of course, they put blue eyes so you can see a very, very small black little pupil. And so when someone's pupils are constricted, that means probably that they're not connecting with you. So part of good audience analysis is to be able to read your audience, to be able to look at them and tell if they're connecting with you. Are they on the same track with you, or have you lost them? Is their mind wandering 30 miles away, or are they right there with you? So before you can construct your speech, you first have to think about your audience. One, does your audience know anything about your topic? And two, does your topic relate to the audience? Now, breaking that down, if you're going to talk about physics and relativity, and you're talking to a group of 70-year-old ladies who are there to learn more about gardening, you may have a problem because they don't know anything about your topic. Next thing, does the topic relate to them? Probably not. You're going to have a heck of a time trying to relate to those people and connect with those people. But let's say, on the other hand, you're talking about different types of fall planting or spring planting. Then you've connected with the audience. You have a topic they know about, that they're interested in, and also one that they can relate to. And think about this. What do you think about your audience, and how do they relate to you, and how do you relate to them? Now, this image is great. This is, I think, people dressing up to like the Rocky Horror Picture Show. But think about what you think about your audience. Do you respect your audience? If you respect them, then you do so much better as a speaker. But if you don't respect your audience, if you're looking around your audience and you're seeing that they're kind of fading off, they're not that interested, and you start losing respect, then you're not doing your best job either. Now, next thing is, how do you relate to your audience? Are they your own peers, or are they people who are just like you, or are they people who are different from you? And of course, as you're formulating your speech, this is important. So let's talk about the demographics of an audience. Audiences sometimes are all one or two different demographics, or they could be a little bit of everything. I've actually spoken to groups before where it's all ages, all ethnic groups, all income groups, all educational groups, and it's very difficult because you find that you can say one thing that relates to part of the audience, but you've lost the other part of the audience because they cannot relate to you. So look at demographics. Your audience could be all over the ages, or they may be the same age as you are. They could be baby boomers, or they could be the Gen X, or whatever. Then, of course, there's the gender. Are they female, or they male, or the combination of both? Race and ethnicity. This is interesting because we don't really live in a world anymore that you can look at an audience and say they're all like I am, because now we live in a very diverse world where you could be speaking and you could have people who are from the Middle East, in Europe, in Africa, in China, all in the same room, and they all come from different culture. It says down here the national cultural background. You can have people that the way you're speaking, you're offending them. So you got to be very careful. You can have people in there who have a monotronic time frame or a polytronic. That means monotronic means that they work basically on the time, looking at the clock all the time. If you speak more than 20 minutes, they can get bored. Polychronic means that they understand that everything happens and is going to continue going until everything is completely finished and everything's been done. So therefore, you can have someone who's a polychronic who realizes that, when you say you got a speech about relativity, they think it could take you 3 hours if necessary, or 30 minutes to get through the whole speech, but they just expect you to get finished with the whole speech. Whereas the polychronic person may sit there after about 30 minutes or an hour and says, you know what, you haven't finished your speech yet, but I'm ready to leave. So, all these cultural backgrounds make a difference. Think about education background. I've been in occasions where I've talked to people who've had high school educations. I've had people who've had PhDs. And believe me, it's very much different between those two because you're really dealing with different levels of where they see in terms of their academics and their scholar abilities. Income level, some people may be extremely wealthy and they have lots of money, and so when you're using examples, talking about where you wouldn't filled up your car and you realize that your Mercedes, the gas tank goes on the right side compared to the left side, they completely related to what you're talking about. Someone else who maybe was lower income, who was lucky just to have any type of car, just kind of like, I don't understand this, a Mercedes? They can't even understand what you're talking about. And then, of course, there's religion in here. Christian, Jewish, Muslim, Buddhist, Hindu, all these different levels. But then break it down into the Christians. You could have a Catholic, you could have a Protestant, you could have an evangelical, you could have what we call the mainstream Christians, which is like a Lutheran or Episcopal. So therefore, you've got to be very careful that you understand what you're dealing with, that you don't offend anybody, and that you actually can connect with them. Last year, physical conditions, disability. And that simply says, do you have someone out there who maybe has a problem hearing or problem seeing? Maybe someone who has a problem processing what you're saying. Do you need to speak a certain way? Do you need to have certain types of visual aids for those type of people? The reason why all this is so important is that you may have a very homogeneous group of people that you have no problems communicating to, or you may actually have a group of people that are so spread out through all these different demographic characteristics that you realize pretty quickly that as you're doing your speech, some people connect with you and some people do not. So before you plan any speech, try to get the information about who you're talking to. If you're talking to someone on a higher educational level, a lower income level, if you're talking to a age group that is maybe they're all the baby boomers, or maybe they're the GIs, or maybe they're the Gen X, as much information as you can get, then the stories you tell, the examples you give would relate to them. So obviously, don't tell the story about the first black and white television if you're talking to a bunch of Generation Ys, because they don't even understand the concept of a black and white television. Matter of fact, to them, a television is just a fact of life. I remember one time an old saying that said that the best thing to do is to think about your grandparents, your parents, and you. What did each one of them see as a luxury? Your grandparents maybe saw a television as a luxury. Your parents maybe saw a computer as a luxury, and you may see an iPad as a luxury. So think about those, and that helps you to best relate to the different people. Now, gathering information for your speech. To prepare your speech, you have to gather supporting information. And with that, you got to keep in mind your audience. What details will they find interesting? Some audiences love statistics. Some audiences love stories. Some audiences love to just have a visual aid to show them. They want to see pictures. Okay, so how can you relate the topic to you, and then to show that you're credible and relate it back over to them so they see you as credible? And then what sources will your audience find as being credible? So think about this for just a moment. Think about what is credible. Credible can be maybe an example of a book or a journal article that you are referencing, maybe as a scholar you're referencing. If you're referencing maybe a historical figure like Thomas Jefferson, you've got to go in there and show people that yes, you're presenting the information, but you're not making it up. Unless you're just telling a story. If it's a narrative, of course, you could probably make up the story if you wanted to. But the supporting material that you give them, the statistics, don't just say the data says this. You need to say according to the Wall Street Journal, according to Forbes. If you go in there and say according to the National Enquirer, that's not very credible. If you're in there quote making a quote and you say a quote and you don't say who said the quote, you're plagiarizing. And that's the fastest way to get people sitting there saying, I cannot believe anything this person is saying. I have actually heard of ministers who will take another minister's sermon, take the manuscript and read it word for word and never give credit to the person. And people say, wow, what a great message, until they find out that it was someone else's message. And then that minister loses total credibility with it. And that credibility, that is what we call ethos, which is you're credible. Logos is you're logical, and then pathos is you're passionate about it. When you create your speech is going to have three parts to it. It starts off with your introduction, and your body, and your conclusion, just like it says here. I'm here to talk about this. This is what I'm going to talk about, and this is what you heard me talk about. That's basically what those three parts are. So when you break it down, introduction, what do you do in your introduction? You're going to introduce yourself. You're going to introduce your topic, the purpose of your speech, all this. And the main thing you're trying to do is an attention getter. How do you get the audience's attention and get them interested in what you're going to say? Well, let's hear a couple things you can do. You can have a quote. One of my favorite quotes is that my favorite Bible verse. And my favorite Bible verse is, "It came to pass." It didn't come to stay, it came to pass. Maybe you're going to tell a short story, or maybe you can give an example. All these are considered supporting material that helps to get people their attention. This little image down the bottom, see, they're sitting around this little bonfire, this little pit fire. I always love that image because many years ago I went to a resort in the eastern part of Tennessee, just down below the Smoky Mountains. And the resort had all of us who were the guests, who were sitting around this large pit fire, and they brought in a local folklore storyteller. And he would walk around telling a story, and it was just awesome. And what made it awesome is that he told the story. He was a great storyteller. He would build up in the story. He would lead us down a path. He would make us feel like we're right in the middle of that story. And as he finished the story, then he would go into the little speech or whatever he was going to talk about. It was just awesome. Next thing is giving examples. People say, what does that mean, giving an example? That's simple, folks. Sometimes your story is your example. Other times you just go there and say, I'm talking today about the black hole. Now, what's an example of a black hole? A black hole is something that sucks things up. I like to use an example of a vacuum cleaner. A vacuum cleaner can be a black hole because it sucks things into it and then it disappears. That's basically a very simple and very maybe an ignorant example of a black hole. Next thing he says here is on your introduction, after you get finished with your attention getting, it could be a quote, statistic, short story, example, whatever, then you got to give a nice, clear transition to the body of your speech. I have had students before that when they get finished with their story, they jump right into the body of their speech, and as the audience, you're left wondering what happened here. All of a sudden, it's like the whole tide of the river changed on you, or the stream, and you can't figure out where you're going to. So therefore, as a speaker, you've got to take your audience down a path. You're taking them through a path through the forest, and you've got to take them with you, and don't let them go off in different directions. So those transitions help people to realize where you're going to next. And the next place you're going to is to the body of your speech, which is basically the main idea of your speech. You got their attention. Now you're going to talk about what you're there to talk about. And like Dr. Seuss says here, it's not about what it is, it's about what it can become. There's a lot of truth in that. When you're talking about, let's say for example, you're talking about the black hole. If you're just sitting there explaining what a black hole is, you're going to bore your audience. But if you explain with examples and stories and how the black hole came about and where it's going to and what's going to happen to it, then all of a sudden you're telling what it's going to become and how the world is changed by the concept of a black hole. Now, I'm not a physics person, and nor am I an astronomy person, so therefore I couldn't even begin to tell you about the black hole. But I can tell you that I've heard people talk about the black hole. Now, I've heard astronomers talk about the black hole, and I'll be completely confused. And I've heard people who've talked about the black hole who completely explain it where I understand what they're talking about. Once again, you got to use transitional statements between your different phrases to move people between the main points. And then once again, as you get to your conclusion. Your conclusion, simply, you're going to restate the purpose of your speech. You're going to state, this is what I told you, not in those words, but you're going to get people to understand where you've taken them, what path you took them down. You've got to leave your audience with something to think about. And think about that for a second. If your audience leaves with no insights, nothing to think about, nothing to apply to their life, then what was the purpose of your speech? I don't know how many times I've been in church services and I've heard a minister, and I'll walk out there and I cannot remember a thing he said, because even though he had great examples and stories, there was no application to my life. There was no insights for me to have those aha moments. So your main point has to have, that body has to have those insights that the person says, wow, I've never thought of it that way, or that's really fascinating, or that's something I never knew that I'm glad I learned about. You cannot do that in your introduction, and you can build part of it into your conclusion, but you got to take them through that path of showing them these different insights, and maybe at your conclusion you bring them all together. Now you can sit there and say to me, is that what type of sermon would not be practical or have an application? I'm telling you, sometimes that's what happens in speeches. People think they're given an application, but it's not clear to the audience. So you have to make things like this extremely clear. I'm not saying consider your audience as being dumb or ignorant. I'm saying if you want them to understand things like how it applies to their life, how it is an insight for them, point it out to them by saying, this is what is important for you to hear. This is an insight that I heard that I want you to hear too. This is how you can apply it to your life. This is what makes this so practical to all of us. So folks, what I'm saying is that sometimes you've got to tell the people that, let me go back and say this. I had a pastor one time, and he would hit his hand on the podium and he said, are you listening today? Are you listening? Boy, when he said that, we all perked up. And sometimes, I'm not saying say things like that, but sometimes you've got to wake up your audience. Okay, next thing, your conclusion, after you have left them with some insights, some practicalities, maybe you want to ask them for answers to, or I'm sorry, ask them if they had any questions, and then answer their questions. Now that can be kind of touchy, because unless you're very knowledgeable, if I was talking about the black holes, and I asked for any questions, I would be scared because they could ask me questions I couldn't answer. So don't do that unless you really know your topic well. But if you're talking about maybe a trip you took over to Romania, or maybe you took the trip to Germany, and you're asking if people had any questions, and you felt confident about your knowledge, go ahead and do it. The last thing you do in your conclusion is to make a call to action. That is, if it's a persuasive speech. If it's an informative speech, no, there's no action call there. But persuasive speech, perhaps it's like recycling. That's where you sit there and you say, folks, now I would encourage everybody to go out there and to, for the next 30 days, see if you cannot recycle everything you can. Or maybe if you're trying to convince people that they need to vote, you need to go there and say, I would ask that everybody, if you've not registered to vote, to go down to the county clerk's office and register to vote. See, that's a call of action. That's telling people, I told you what's important. I told you why you need to do it. Now go and do it. So that's considered a call of action. Every speech can almost always prosper with visual aids. Sometimes you can't put visual aids in there. Other times you can. But like it says here, sometimes words are not enough to convey your topic to your audience. See that picture of the lady with the red outfit on and the hairpiece? I could describe that for 3 hours and you could never understand what I'm talking about until you saw that image. Look at this little dog. You know, what a cute little dog. I could describe this as such a cute little dog. He's got white fur, his little ears, you see his little paws sticking out, he's got his big black eyes. I could describe that, but when you see that image, oh my goodness, it really does resonate with you. So if you're trying to describe something, don't you think the audience would benefit by seeing a picture of what you're trying to describe? That's if you can have visual aids. Sometimes you cannot. Sometimes just the environment doesn't allow for visual aids. You don't have the PowerPoint, you don't have the projector, but if you do, you know, wouldn't the audience appreciate that? And plus it adds enthusiasm to your speech. Just like when I was talking here a moment ago about the little puppy dog here. You were looking at it, I was looking at it, and it creates a sense of we're on a shared message at that point. But are your pictures distracting your audience? Take a look at the bottom picture, this couple standing in the water. I've shown this picture several times, this whole slide. I've shown it to my students, and I'm amazed at what they come up with. My students tell me, they say, yeah, I was trying to figure out why his hand was behind him, you know, or are they clothed or they're not? And I'm kind of like, oh my goodness, I didn't even realize that when I brought these images up. I'm talking about, you know, what a wonderful place it would be to be out here on this Hawaiian island where you have the water. You know, they're not seeing that. They're seeing this couple here. So sometimes your pictures will take your people a different direction. Sometimes they don't hear anything you're saying. And when you're sitting there talking, if you're talking, you know, saying like maybe, let's say a word every couple of seconds, and they have zoned out for 20 seconds, they've lost 10 to 15 to 20 words you've said. That can be a problem. So images can be a distraction. So the point is, your images have to support, if you use pictures, they have to support what you're saying, but make sure that they don't take you off of what you're saying. Otherwise, you can have a serious problem with it. But then this is one of my favorite pictures of all, because I can sit here and tell you things like an old couple that's in love who has spent their life together and they're going shopping together. Everybody can probably visualize that. But when you see an image like this here, think about what you think. When I first saw this picture, it did not remind me of my grandparents at all. I've had other people say, that just reminds me of my grandparents. I see there, I think, I hope my wife and I are like that someday, that, you know, we're walking down holding hands. So here's a case where an image can go a bunch of different directions, whereas in this picture here, the puppy dog image, the couple image, basically cannot go multiple directions. It pretty much stays right there. It's a cute dog. It's a very attractive couple standing in the water. But here's something that you can read a lot into. Where are they? You know, are they in New York City? You know, what's the deal about this couple? Are they married? Or are they two widowers who have gotten together? It's just, there's a lot to be said about this. So basically, as we conclude here, is that when you prepare your speech, number one, always remember you're trying to connect with your audience. You have to connect. And I'm a big believer that those pupils, the dilated pupils, if you can see them, tells you a lot if you're connecting with your audience. Next thing, you have to analyze your audience to connect with them. You got to look at all the demographics, understand what makes them who they are, and make sure that not only do you not offend them, but that you use the words, the stories, the examples, things that matches their demographics. Next thing you want to do is you want to always go in there and have a very clear introduction where you have an attention getter, something. It could be a story, the example, it could be statistics, it could be a quote, a nice transition takes you into the body. And then the body, you want to get there and you want to give them the insights. If you don't give them insights and practical information, they will walk out and they will not even remember anything you said. And your conclusion brings it all back together. If it's persuasive speech, you're going to have a call to action. And lastly, all good speeches, if possible, has some type of visual images that helps to drive points home. Folks, I hope you enjoyed this lecture today, and just always remember, every one of us, we're all accomplished speakers. We just don't think we are. So keep preparing your speeches, keep looking at your audience, and always look for every opportunity you can to go out there and be a good public speaker.